Hey guys, welcome back to our daily driven supercharger boost build. So we're taking this Fox, it's a daily driven car, putting a blower on it, doing it in stages so that we can keep driving it. We've previously done the fuel system, we did the lower radiator coil last time, we got the radiator moved forward, got some clearance for our pipes. We're gonna start working on the actual supercharger portion today. We actually got some parts in. Reese has been going through some of these. I haven't looked at all of these yet, so let's take a look. I know we got brackets. Cool. Bolts up to the motor somewhere. And, oh man, what's that? That's a big flat one. Huge big flat brackets. Blower, alternator?
Blower, yeah.
Blower, okay. So yeah, we have to figure out all of these and then, miscellaneous little brackets in here, hardware. What do we got? A little crank pulley. Wow, that's a beast. Look at that. It's like inch thick. Wow, nothing like the normal stamped steel. That's incredible. I guess they don't want that to break. Got some other, belts, tensioners, parts. That's cool. But I want to see the main thing. Ooh, yeah, there we go. Got us a blower. Which one is this again?
V1 SI.
V1 SI. All right, so this is the external oil fed one, right? So we're gonna have to tap off the oil supply, feed it oil pressure, and we'll have a drain back down to the oil pan. It's not very big. It's just kind of like a little turbo. Very cool. You know what size this is offhand?
The exit?
Yeah.
275.
275, okay. Nice. Not very heavy either. Cool, so yeah, we can only do so much per day because we got to get this car back on the road. So we're going to try to get the bracketry in there. Take a look at the car here. So obviously the blower is going to sit right here. So I think for today's phase, what we're going to try and do is get those brackets in, relocate the alternator down, however we got to do all that, get the new belt routing, and get that set up. We should be able to get it back on the road. And then for another phase, we could actually get the intercooler in and the piping coming up to it, and eventually throw in the blower and complete the system and have it going. So yeah, let's dive in and see what we're gonna run into. This should be interesting. All right, that's what we got to work with. Okay, here's the bracket we just pulled off, and here's what we're replacing it with. Wow, that's a whole lot different. We printed out all these instructions, so I guess we better start reading them and see where that goes and how it goes. Quite a few pages in here, actually. Should be interesting. And it looks like we also have this bracket. You get to reuse the stock tensioner. It looks like it slides in there, and that's for the inner belt. We'll have an outside blower belt as well now. So, yeah, let's go figure this guy out, see where it goes. Okay, we figured out this orientation so far. This guy sits right on there like that. That's gonna drop through. That's one of the cylinder head mounting bolts, and then there's one down there and one down there, and then this little short stubby guy, it goes in the top here to pinch this upper plate down to here, and of course the other bolts will do it. But so this is the basic assembly now that needs to go up onto the cylinder head. So that's our starting point to try to figure things out. Okay, we've been mocking up where the accessories are going to go on here and see where the alternator is going to fit in. It actually goes in this gap right here. So the alternator would come up and sit right down at the bottom over here like that. And then the other end of the alternator here, there's a bracket that comes up that would attach to the smog pump. This vehicle doesn't have a smog pump, so that means there's nothing here. So we could put an idler in here and drill and tap a hole for that bracket to curl around, but that's kind of cumbersome and a mess. We don't want to do that. We're thinking about moving this whole alternator up over here in place of the smog pump and deleting this bottom section out. And let me show you on the diagram why. So when we look at this, the alternator is right down here, and you can see the smog pump sits up there. And if you look at this belt routing, how it goes, if we just eliminated the smog pump, this upper belt, it would come down straight down to the alternator, it would hit this water pump pulley. That's why we can't just delete that. So instead we're gonna move that up and eliminate that. So that's why we're gonna try and relocate the alternator and make a new mounting point for it up top there, because then the belt could just curl around it and go back. No additional idlers, nothing special. It'd just be a lot more simple and cleaner setup. Woo, that's a teaser. That looks great. Look at that. About ready for boost. Okay, not really. So we got it mocked up here because we need to test clearance on the bottom side to see how this, if we're gonna relocate the alternator from here up to here, we gotta make sure it's gonna fit. We're not gonna get in the way of the oil drain or hit the actual body of it, because the body of it's real close down here. It's like almost in line with this bracket. All right, with the blower out of the way, you can kind of see what we're trying to do with the alternator. We're trying to get it up here where the smog pump used to go. Obviously this gap is too big, so we're gonna have to add a bushing in there, but you can see it has a clearance issue back there. The alternator's hitting this bracket down below. It's also hitting the bracket back here, and it's hitting the sway bar mounting point of the body. Now, if we clearance the bracket back there, this mounting bolt up front here will actually go away and become a much shorter bolt, because we'll clearance that all the way back and put a shorter bolt in there, and that'll give us some space back there for the alternator to swing back and forth. We'll clearance this out the back here, and that'll move it off of the body, so we won't have to do any clearancing on the body. Okay, the tensioner is not quite fitting here. This pin is too big for that hole, but that's easy enough. We'll just drill that out and we'll get that in. The other issue is this bolt. As I was trying to get it through, I realized they don't actually have threads in here, and this bolt's too long, but it looks like we're in luck. I can just shorten this bolt, and I got a nut and I squeezed it in here, and it's really tight, but it actually fits in there. So I think this cut down with a nut onto here, we'll have to pull this back off and assemble it, and that'll get us the tensioner on here. It's also a little bit questionable here with this pulley. Now this is an oversized water pump pulley, it's an underdrive pulley. That's looking like it might become an issue here. We'll address that next. Okay, I got this sorted out. The tensioner's on there, except it was hitting this. I had to remove this to get it to fit. So I got one from a 93 Cobra. Look at that massive difference. It's unbelievable how underdriven it was. Now, of course, the 93 Cobras were a little bit smaller than the GTs because they had an underdrive, not quite as much as this, but they had an underdrive from the factory. But this actually slips in here. Let me just line it up there. And it actually fits and clears. So this is gonna be the ticket. We'll do a 93 Cobra. Kind of ironic, we put one of these on the 92 Fox as well to make it work. Okay, based on our mock-ups, I've marked out here what we're gonna clearance and take off. So all this bottom piece should go away. And that'll allow the alternator to swing down and get a bit of fitment. A surprise rain delay. Okay, so one of the things we've been discussing with moving this alternator up here and eliminating the second pulley, we have the serpentine belt's gonna come up here. Both ends of it are gonna come up here like this. And we gotta make sure they don't touch each other here. So while we just got this loosely mocked up and we haven't cut anything, we're gonna go ahead and test fit the belt here real quick and see exactly how that's gonna fit once all this goes together. So that end will have to squeeze in there as well. So let me move the tensioner here. Pull that up, get the belts pulled in there, and oh, that clears. But now when the tensioner comes down, okay, so that's on a brand new belt that's going to hit right there. So we have, what's that, maybe 1.5 inches of clearance. As it stretches into the belt and puts tension, and we got to account for a bit of belt stretch on a brand new belt. I mean, I still have a finger gap in there. I think this is going to work just fine. It's a good thing we put the smaller pulley on. We have that smaller 93 Cobra one I mentioned earlier. Without that, this would not be possible. We would have contact here.
We also have an underdrive power steering.
That's true. This is a much larger pulley here, similar to what's on the the SN95 V6 Mustangs, right? Mm-hmm. That's where that came from, or just like it. So yeah, I think this is going to work. It looks like we got clearance. Got to double check because once we cut this stuff, there's no going back. All right, here's the bracket that goes on the front of the engine, bolts up to the cylinder head, and this is the areas that we're going to cut off to make the alternator relocate from here up to here. And let me show you how we came about that. So I have a mock alternator here. This is not the one from the car. The one in the car is hardwired, and I didn't want to cut the wires. But this is very similar. It's got the same 3-inch gap, which would normally sit over here, come around, and you would have the emissions pump over here. Instead, we're moving this over to here, and we're going to try and swing it in for clearance so it doesn't hit the body, and that's why we've got all these areas to cut off. The bottom here so that the bottom can swing in here, and we have to clear it some of that here so that when it swings in, it has some space, and we may have to cut further up depending on how it works out. Let me put these two halves together here, and I'll show you. The first thing you'll notice is this is a 3-inch gap, that's a 4-inch gap. So we got a 1-inch spacer that will sit down here, and that'll close up our gap and push the alternator up to the correct position. I can go ahead and drop a bolt in here and just kind of show you what I'm talking about. So we have the alternator sitting there. Now you can see it's contacting here, and that's why I have all of that cross hatching drawn there to cut off those ribs and remove some material so it can swing in. All right, we're getting there. It's looking really good. You can see this bracket's clearance down here. It's profiled real nice, looks good. That's the position of the alternator. Everything fits. You can see we had to put a bushing back here to make it get in there. And actually we clocked the alternator and turned it around. See this clearance over here? There's this electrical connector over here was kind of, it wasn't actually interfering, there was clearance, but if the motor was torquing or the transmission is coming out because you're working on it and the engine tilts, that wasn't gonna be good. So we went ahead and clocked the back. Let me go ahead and pull all this out and I'll show you what it took to make that work. All right, we've been working on this for hours, cutting away bits at a time and testing so we didn't overshoot anything. And this is kind of where we got to. You can see it's a huge difference. A whole lot of materials cut out of here. This boss down here, we kind of left this. A bolt can still go in. There's a portion on the block that'll connect to, so that's still in use. And we did not cut this off because we're going to use that for an additional bracket, which I'll show you in just a second. So then this top plate that went on, you remember that had a huge piece coming out here. That's all gone. We cleared that up. And we had to drill this hole out for 7/16 as well as the one down here and get a nice 7/16 bolt because that's what the alternator takes. I can show you what we have going on. Now, as you remember previously, this was going to be the original location of the alternator. You can see what a huge difference it would have been hanging down here. With all that cleared out and gone, it looks a lot tighter and more compact. Now, this gap, of course, was bigger, so we got that bushing in there, the 7/16. And now that our hole's drilled out, we can actually fit the bolt in here. Drop that all the way in. And now you can see this pivots and swings in here because we got all that clearance. One thing I did mention earlier when I was in the car, you couldn't quite see. I said I clocked the alternator. The idea is, you see there's an electrical connector. On the one on the car, it was coming right near the body. It was kind of questionable, you know. While that one's a little bit different, similar concept, undid the bolts and just kind of turned the back housing and clocked it in a different position. Tightened them down, and that way my electrical went from pointing at the body to up out of the way like that. Hey guys, welcome back. We're on day 2. We made really good progress on day 1. We still have a lot ahead of us, so it's going to be a long day. It's pouring with rain too, which kind of slows us down a little bit of grinding and welding out there, so a little bit tricky. But let me show you where we're at. So we got all this bracketry done like we did yesterday. We got a belt in here for mocking up. This is actually just the original belt. But you can see we have a little bit of play with that alternator. We can move it a little bit forwards and backwards to adjust tension. And now I've got to go ahead and fab up this bracket we got to put down here, which means we need the actual lower blower pulley on there, not that stock one because it's a different size. So I got the blower pulley here, but it doesn't fit on there. It does not fit a stock damper, at least not our stock damper because it's been modified. So what we're going to do is we got a hold of a new damper here. This is a Romac. We had been waiting on an ATI for months. It just kept getting pushed out, supply chain issues. Did a little research. We found some info on those guys. They're supposedly pretty good. So that's going to save our butt. So first order of business, we're going to go ahead and swap out this damper so we can get on the correct lower pulley. Figure out a new belt size. We have to get a hold of a belt. Hopefully we can find one locally. Then we can start fabbing up this bracket and making some progress. So let's jump into it. Okay, we got the stock damper out, and now we can see why we couldn't fit this pulley right on top of it. So like most Fox bodies, your lower crank pulley, it tends to have a bit of wobble in place, so it doesn't sit quite right. It moves all over. And getting that centered up just perfect, even with the bolts, it doesn't line up enough. And when the car fires up, it tends to vibrate all over the place. So what we did is we took this one into a machine shop. They centered it and they machined that around, perfectly centered. And then they put this ring on here. It's I'm not sure what it's made of really. It's some kind of metal. It looks like a brass maybe. They pressed that on there and then they machined this hole open a little bigger to match. So it makes a pretty tight sort of hub-centric fit on there. And now when you fire up the car like this, you don't see it vibrating or anything. It spins perfectly dead center. But because of that larger diameter, any other pulley can't fit on there. So hence we couldn't even put this on, not even for mock-up. So we're swapping out the dampers now. This one luckily I noticed is a real snug, proper fit, so we don't have to go through that same process with the machine shop. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw in this new front main seal, and then we'll get the new damper in. All right, put some muscle in there. All right, damper's on, low crank pulley is on, and since then there's a huge gap in the video. We've spent hours running back and forth to hardware stores and auto parts stores and trying to get this going. We've wasted a lot of our day. Let me show you what's going on. We got the belt on here. It's nice and tight. The problem is when this tensioner goes down, it's gonna really squish this. And although we can stretch this out and make our little bracket here that we've been trying to figure out how to make, the problem is this belt's gonna stretch. And we know that, so we've been trying to come up with a solution. We thought about making two brackets, one to bolt up here, and then once this stretches and the tensioner gets it down and it gets close to contact, we then re-expand it out and put a bigger bracket in, but that's cumbersome and a terrible idea. Another thought we had was we got a hold of a smaller alternator pulley. We're gonna put a smaller pulley on here with a smaller belt, let it stretch out, then switch pulleys and get back to the bigger one. Another worthless idea. Then we thought about splitting this and trying to make this adjustable and welding like a nut and a bolt and essentially making it where we could worm gear it out and expand it to account for the stretch in the belt. And then I realized, you know what, I'm just trying to recreate a Heim joint. I'm an idiot. I don't know why I didn't think about that a long time ago. If we could have got one on order and done, we would have been in great shape. So we went digging through our stash and we found a Heim joint, but it's way too long. So we went ahead and ordered a correct length one, but it's not going to be here for a few days. And this car needs to be running tonight. It's got to go to work in the morning. So I think we're going to try and modify this one and see if we can make it work. We might be able to actually just shrink down one end of the tube, rethread it, and move it down shorter. Now we can only do that on one side because we only have right-hand thread taps. Of course, one end is a left-hand thread. All right, this is where we're at with this Heim joint. As you can tell, it's quite a bit shorter now. This is the section I cut out. It's a little over 2 inches. Quite a big chunk out. And I had to drill and tap in here some new threads. I think this was hardened. It was quite tough to get that done, but I got it in there. So that way when we're putting a brand new belt on like this, we will have this contracted down to its smallest position, allowing the alternator to come in, get that fitted in, and we can expand it out just a little bit to pre-tension the belt. And we want to pre-tension this belt so that this secondary automatic spring tensioner doesn't bottom out on the water pump here. Now a brand new belt will stretch within about 5 to 10 minutes of runtime, and it'll stretch to a certain amount and it'll hold that new length for the life of the belt. And that's where this secondary tensioner comes in. After 5 or 10 minutes of runtime, we'll come back and we'll expand this guy out, make him longer, pushing the alternator further away, and it'll retake up the tension in here. Woo, it's in, there it is. Heim joint in place. Got the bushing, extended bolt. It's expanded out a little bit, or we can keep cranking it, pre-tension this. We still got to get the tensioner on and a bunch of stuff. It's a little worrying. It's already 9 o'clock at night. This took way too much of a delay, but I think we can make it. Otherwise, we're walking in the morning. We've got a lot of little upper stuff to get on so we can get this driving by the morning, but I think we're going to make it. It might be an all-nighter, but we're going to get there. All right, we got it all back together. It's pretty late, we're tired. We're not gonna start it tonight, it's too late. We're gonna get cleaned up and fired up in the morning. I think it's all gonna work. We got it all together. Our Heim joint was just a little bit too long still, even after shortening it. It was a struggle to get it in there, get it going. We do have a shorter one on the way, which will hopefully fix that problem. But everything cleared. We got our radiator back in, and this shroud, it was really tight. You know, something we hadn't planned for. We're lucky it fits. We have an electric fan in there, which helps our clearances, but otherwise everything's in. We got our water pump clearance on the serpentine belt, and everything else looks like it's fitting. So I feel like we're in good shape. So see you in the morning and see what happens. All right, good morning. Let's get this thing fired up and see what happens. Okay, go ahead and fire it up. That's weird. Doesn't ride all the way on the tensioner. Belt's on at least. Well, this showed up right away. The tensioner actually doesn't ride the belt quite correctly. You can see it sits too far forward, so the edge lip of it is digging in the belt. That will slice the belt, so we need to space this tensioner back real quick. Well, we got lucky. All we had to do was just flip the pulley around. So it's kind of on backwards, but it fits perfectly now. So let's give this another shot. Alright, we did a test drive and we retightened this as best we can, and that is really close. It's pretty sketchy. But we're out of time, car's gotta leave for work, so we're gonna see what it's gonna do. We're just gonna drive it. Other than that, everything else is a success. Car's all together. I think we're in good shape besides a possible belt rub. Alright guys, till next time, this is our daily driven boost build. It's getting a little rough. We've had 2 really long days, but probably should have broken down what we did. But it's back on the road. So far, we're still surviving this daily driven boost build. Till next time. Alright, so after a few days of driving, this gap got down to where it was pretty much touching. You can see we have a huge gap there now because we removed this tensioner completely. What we did was we built a bracket to go down at the bottom on the alternator, and that allowed us to expand our hind joint out even further to take up the tension that we wanted. And we just removed the tensioner entirely. And for now, we're gonna run it that way. Part of the problem is this run of belt is so long, it would take so much tension to hold that tensioner, the automatic tensioner, up in the air. We were gonna, break something, bearings on the motor or something else. It wasn't gonna work out. But that's just temporary, not a big deal. The way this power steering sits, we're likely gonna swap it out for AC. We'll move it down and put AC up here, add AC onto this car. And when you do that, the AC compressor sits higher and slightly more over, and that fixes all these belt issues we're having over here. So we're just gonna run it like this and make further changes, add the automatic tensioner back once we put AC on the car. So I think we're good.